And earlier today, Boris Johnson handed over his bombshell 60-page defence dossier to the Privileges Committee ahead of Wednesday's televised question into whether he misled Parliament during Partygate. Now, allies of the former PM believe the dossier, which is expected to be made public tomorrow, will exonerate Bojo of any wrongdoing. Meanwhile, several senior Tories have warned that the investigation has descended into a witch hunt, including Lord Greenhalgh speaking to Times Radio yesterday.
Concerned that it will be a witch hunt, and I'm concerned to read in papers that obviously are being briefed by everybody left, right and centre, of concern that we're going to get a McCarthyite approach to justice on the Privileges Committee.
Well, I believe we are, as I've been saying for many months. I believe there is a Westminster witch hunt against Boris Johnson. But do you agree? Email me, dan@gbnews.uk. Vote in our poll at GBnews on Twitter. Those results coming up shortly. But to help you make up your mind, I'm joined by top Tory barrister Stephen Barrett, the former Conservative Health Minister Edwina Currie, former Chief Secretary to the Treasury David Malla, and former Number 10 Director of Communications under John Major Jonathan Haslam. So, Stephen, I want to come to you first because you have been doing some fascinating, must-read, essential analysis and work on the Privileges Committee over the past few months. And your verdict about its legal legitimacy is damning. Tell me what you've discovered, Stephen.
Well, thank you for that. And yes, and I must correct you because I'm not appearing here as a Conservative and I'm not appearing here as a supporter of Mr. Johnson or any other politician. What I am doing is explaining to the public, largely on the work done by Lord Panic, who has done 2 legal opinions for the committee, what error the committee has fallen into. And it is a particularly dark and particularly concerning error. The committee has decided to stand outside the rule of law and to abandon justice. It is acting in a wholly disreputable way. That will apply whichever politician is ever called before it. And that is something that the public need to know. It's almost bigger than, I mean, it's hard to say, isn't it, in politics, but it's almost bigger than Boris. Because it will repeat itself time after time after time. And once you unleash a show trial, then there is no putting the genie back in the bottle.
And Stephen, can we just dig down into that a little bit, Stephen, because that is because they have now taken away this idea that it doesn't matter whether Boris was intending to mislead Parliament or not.
Yes, and I'm really grateful that people have grasped with that issue because that's one of the key ones. Redefining the event, the offence after the event is inherently unjust. That is completely morally wrong. If we had an offence, and you just can't do that. You cannot change the law after the event. The 1997 resolution is binding on this committee. Erskine May is binding on this committee. And all this committee has done is jazz hands. And that is ridiculous. That is absurd. They have denied him access to proper legal counsel. They've denied his legal counsel the ability to ask questions. They've denied him any real access to what they're going to the information and the charge that they are putting before him. Even this evening, we've seen the total absurdity that they are going to edit his defence. No court would edit a defendant's defence. That's simply ridiculous. The president of this court, the chair of this committee, has already declared him guilty. What on earth?
No, she has. And you're referring, of course, there to Harriet Harman, who tweeted before she was taking on this role that she believed that Boris had lied. So, Edwina Currie, Stephen Barrett says they're inherently unjust, morally wrong. Do you think this is a witch hunt, Edwina?
Well, that would make Boris a wizard, and I wouldn't be surprised if that's what he turns out to be on this occasion. Look, we've got 3 different kinds of court we're talking about here. One is you've got criminal court, where it has to be beyond reasonable doubt, and you're innocent till proven guilty. And then you have the civil court, where it's a balance of probabilities. And then you have the Privileges Committee and many other select committees who do this sort of thing in the Commons. And that's a moralistic pantomime. Now, I've had to appear before one of them, not the Privileges Committee, but you know that the view on whether you are guilty of whatever they're accusing of has already been decided. The only real question is, what are they going to do about it? Plus, what kind of theatre is it going to be? Boris, it sounds like, is going to bluff it all out. He's got these thousands of pages of evidence in his favour. We're all going to spend all day Wednesday watching it. I think we should provide ourselves with a glass of Prosecco while we do it, because it's going to take a long time.
Yeah, maybe a few vodka and Diet Cokes, although I won't be doing that, of course, because I will be working hard. David Mellor, look, I know that you don't believe the committee is a witch hunt. However, how do you feel about the fact that the evidence from Sue Gray, the Sue Gray report, is being treated as sacrosanct? And this is now the woman who will not say how long she has been in negotiations with the leader of the opposition, Keir Starmer, to become the Labour Party chief of staff. Why on earth should we trust any of the evidence from Sue Gray now?
And I don't think we should. I don't think we should. Look, it's a fairly narrow point, actually, and I'm sorry, I'm hysteria'd out, and I cannot get hysterical about this. The reality is that Boris is being hauled over the coals for, it is asserted, having told an untruth or a series of untruths to his colleagues in Parliament. And did he or didn't he? I mean, he's not exactly free from lawyers. Lord Panic, wonderful name that, isn't it? Panic. Don't panic. Panic's here. Panic is one of the most expensive briefs around. He is acting for Boris. We'll see. But Boris cannot be surprised that he's being called to account, because that's what these committees are there to do. If Boris has lied, told untruths, terminological inexactitudes, as we used to have to call them, then, he will get what he deserves. I suspect it'll be somewhere in the muddled middle. And, I can't get excited about this. I'm sorry.
But Jonathan Haslam, surely it's not up to a privileges committee stacked against Boris Johnson to decide whether the bloke who was elected at the last election in a landslide continues to sit as an MP. And that is the potential consequence of this inquiry, is it not?
No, it's not, Dan. Far from it. The committee is one stage in a process. The committee will examine all the evidence. They are not, as your other lawyer was pretending, editing what Boris Johnson said. My understanding is that they will redact names which are being put in there, and they need to be protected. So what you have got then is a committee which will examine the evidence. The evidence that we are promised, this great dossier so far, if the best endeavours you've got are the 2 WhatsApp messages from Jack Doyle saying to the Prime Minister, "You're OK," that looks pretty flimsy. Now, let me come back to the main point. The committee is a stage in the process. They examine the evidence. They will publish the evidence. We will see on TV how Boris Johnson responds to it. And then the committee will decide on that evidence and put a report to the House of Commons. And thereafter, the House of Commons, 650 parliamentarians, will be able to examine it themselves, to debate it, and if there is to be a sanction, they will decide upon it. So it is a stage in a process. This isn't a witch hunt. This is an opportunity to find out whether our elected Prime Minister has told truth or untruth. And that is a good process, and it's extremely important that it's followed through to its conclusion. But it's not the committee that makes the ultimate decision. It's the House of Commons. And whatever Lord Panic says, and his assertions have been roundly dismissed in the past about the legality or otherwise of what's going on, the House of Commons will decide ultimately on the balance of advantage, on the balance of probabilities, on the evidence that they see in an unwhipped form, whether or not they should sanction Boris Johnson. And that's a good process.
Stephen Barrett, do you want to respond to that?
I think it's very important that the press and the public don't associate our independent courts too closely with this process. It is what it is. The public should judge it for what it is. The idea that these mealy-mouthed words actually mean anything is clearly absurd. Lord Panic was Boris Johnson's biggest enemy in Miller 2. He convinced the Supreme Court to say that Boris Johnson prorogued Parliament. The idea that one of our greatest lawyers should be traduced by, frankly, for political reasons, and that justice and the rule of law should be just ground into the dust because we don't like Boris. Well, fine. If you do that, it will have consequences. I want the public to know
Come on, just
we,
answer the
lawyers in the
question
courts, have got
rather
nothing to
than
do with
blathering,
it.
because you're just not getting there. Lord Pannick's he's a man for hire. He'll go and support any case that's going to pay his wages. That's the way it works. What I've said is that the House of Commons is the ultimate arbiter. They will judge the evidence. The committee will make a recommendation. We will all hear the evidence,
Edwina?
the rebuttal, and you need to get on with it and accept that that's the way it is.
Jonathan is being a little disingenuous for all sorts of good reasons. The House of Commons is not composed of a load of judges. The House of Commons is composed of a load of politicians, and they will make their judgment and they will have their vote on the basis of politics, believe me. And I understand that, at least on the Conservative side, it's quite likely to be a free vote. Now, if Boris is actually sanctioned by this committee to be suspended for 10 days or more, and if the Commons actually agrees with that, and it's at least possible that that might happen, then the next stage could be an automatic by-election. It needs a collection of signatures in his
Indeed, only 10,000 though. And he'll get that because Labour will put everything into that. No, indeed, I'm with you, and that is very important to point out.
The electorate, Dan, then in Henley, will have its decision to take. And if they don't agree with the way Boris Johnson has proceeded, they can get rid of him. If they do agree that the House of Commons has got it wrong, the committee's got it wrong, everybody else has got it wrong, the right way is that the electorate decides, and I'm sure David and Edwina would agree on that.
OK, fascinating debate.
It's just a process.
Final word, David Maller.
The question is whether the electorate decides a general election along with everybody else when they're electing.
Am I getting a word in here?
Edwina, just give David Maller the final word, please.
I don't think that this is anything other than a process. There are some people who just cannot stand anybody being critical of Boris, despite Boris's desperation to make people critical of him on fundamental points like integrity and honesty. The reality is that Boris is being called to account for some of the things he said, which it is asserted by others was not accurate and was so inaccurate as to amount to deceit. I don't know what the outcome will be. Normally on these parliamentary bloodlettings, you think, well, at least they're going to be mildly amusing. This one isn't remotely amusing. No. It's just tedious. Most people will be glad when it's over.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. That I agree with you on. David Maller, Tory party grandee, alongside the barrister Stephen Barrett, former Conservative Health Minister Edwina Currie, and the former Number 10 Director of Communications Jonathan Haslam. Absolutely fascinating discussion. Who do you agree with? Is there a Westminster witch hunt against Boris Johnson? I say yes. So does Stephen on Twitter, who writes 100%. Starmer and Labour knew they wouldn't win with Boris in charge, so they needed him gone. He was the biggest obstacle to the left. Mary writes, no hunt, just holding the untrustworthy, pathological liar to account. And from Steve, you bet your boots there is, led by the witch-finder General Harriet Harman, who's already decided his guilt. 20 years ago today, Blair and co committed much bigger sins and were not held accountable. Steve, of course, referring to the anniversary of the start of the Iraq War there. And your verdict is now in. 75% of you agree with me that Boris Johnson is the victim of a Westminster witch hunt. 25% of you say he is not.